I'm here today to present the paper entitled Intellectual Property in the New Normal, Challenges in the Digital Age. This paper seeks to demonstrate how intellectual property relates with digital transformation during and after pandemics. It will assess if intellectual property laws and regulations in the Philippines are sufficient to foster innovation, protection, and enforcement in the digital environment, and identify problems related to weak enforcement of IP rights in the digital platform. Finally, the study will make recommendations on how to foster an environment conducive to innovation and business activity by ensuring that intellectual property rights are preserved and maintained in the post-pandemic digital age. We have been affected much by the pandemic, and we saw the rise of many platforms, digital platforms. We have worked from home for some time now, and this has brought challenges to how we deliver our work. There has been a rise also in online transactions, and we have just experienced in the last election the online election campaigns. So all of these have contributed to the rise in intellectual property creation, and at the same time, the threat to intellectual property infringement. As the digital transformation becomes necessary in the new normal, government and private businesses should quickly adapt and keep abreast with the needs of the times. And it is expected that even after the pandemic subsides and people return to work physically, digital or online transactions will remain part of the new normal. And with the accelerated shift in the digital realm, Lau Kwa Kok, the head of the Singapore-based IP law firm, said that digitalization and IP come hand in hand. Governments should encourage businesses to embark on digitalization and should not only offer funding, but also make it easier for businesses to protect IP rights. So the COVID-19 pandemic has accelerated the shift to the digital space and affected IP filings in different ways. In some countries, there have been an increase in IP filings, like in EU and China. However, what is consistent is that there are also IP violations during the pandemic, the rise of unauthorized copying online. So as regards the Philippines, we might ask, do we have sufficient laws to prevent IP infringement? What are the specific challenges in enforcing intellectual property in the digital age? So let me go to the methodology of the paper. I would like to show that one of the objectives of the paper is to show how IP intersects with digital transformation. It should examine whether the law and regulations on IP are sufficient to support innovation and protection in the digital realm. And in the end, I will also give some recommendations on how IP can be protected in the digital space. So in my research, the pandemic has resulted to increase in IP protection because registration can now be done online. In fact, IPO Philippines has a fully digital registration system where you don't need to go to the office, IP office anymore, and all office actions can be transacted through email and through online. But on the other hand, because of the convenience this has brought, infringement, copying, unauthorized use has also increased. So there now is, we should have a balance between increasing IP protection on one hand and also an increase in infringement on the other. So there is now an enforcement problem that subsists, if not worsened, because of the convenience, no, of doing things, transacting business online. So let me now go to the point of discussion of the paper. And in my research, looking at the laws of the Philippines, Republic Act 8293, the amendment thereto, the tech transfer law, and the many other IP-related laws and regulations, we can say that IP laws are sufficient. We also have the cybercrime law, which has just been passed. So these guard, no, against the unauthorized or unlawful use of our intellectual property. But because of the acceleration of the shift to the digital age, we may not be ready to implement our IP rights, enforce our IP rights in the digital realm. And so it has caused weak enforcement in the digital platform. And what are some of the causes of this weak enforcement? I identified some of them. One is low IP awareness. No? Since people are accustomed to just copy, borrow, and just download IP online, then they may think that it is just okay, since no one is injured, if that is being done. What they do not know is that that is already stealing, and that is infringement of IP rights. So the low awareness contributes to the weak enforcement. What else? There is low resources for IP management. If you look at companies, businesses, you would hardly see an IP department, intellectual property office, in that company. There is always an HR, there is always the finance or accounting, but you will not see much intellectual property department. So it is now high time that companies, institutions, even universities have their own IP unit so that they can properly enforce their IP rights. Lack of IP policies and guidelines, similar to lack of resources for IP management. Companies do not have a policy on intellectual property. In fact, even for universities, there are still some who do not have. Although the new amendment to the IP code now requires that all higher education institutions have an IP policy that would govern the IP rights of all the stakeholders. Still, this is in progress and in the making. And because there is no policy, then that contributes to the weak enforcement. Another reason is that people are reactive rather than proactive. They react to the IP infringement when it happens, but they do not try to prevent it. And that probably also is because of the low IP awareness. So in the latest country commercial guide for the Philippines, the International Trade Administration of the United States reported that the Philippine laws and policies that generally support a conducive IP environment, but enforcement is irregular and inconsistent. So this is from the ITA USA 2021. And this supports our position that though we have sufficient IP laws, what is lacking is enforcement. So the problem in the Philippines is not about the laws on IP in the digital age, but to enforcement. And to address this enforcement problem, there is a need to know its root causes. And these are the root causes that I have mentioned just now. Lack of political will. Maybe enforcement of IP rights is not a priority for government and for private businesses. And so there is a need, really, it all boils down to being more aware, being committed to protecting IP rights. So let me now go to my conclusion. You can read the details of what I have just said in the paper. But the conclusion is that majority of businesses operating in the Philippines, MSMEs, need to protect their IP. By the way, SMME comprises 99.5% of all companies in the Philippines. And they're able to thrive during the pandemic, mainly because of their IP and goodwill via the e-commerce platform. And we saw a lot of small and medium companies that sprouted during the pandemic for this reason. So that is for the part of MSMEs. For universities and educational institutions, the challenge is how to step down from its ivory tower and be involved on the ground, and embrace the triple helix model. Triple helix model means that the three components, government, industry, and academia, should work together for social and economic development. And for universities, this is the third mission, which we call technology transfer. And finally, for government, there is a need for government to continue supporting IP awareness and technology transfer. And let me say that during these past years, government, through its different agencies, particularly the DOST, IPO-Phil, and CHED, have been very supportive in funding IP projects, commercialization projects, and also in increasing awareness of IP. So, considering that the problems raised on the weak enforcement on the weak enforcement of IP, the following are my recommendations. One is ramp up programs and activities to raise IP awareness. I think that's the root problem, and so we should address that first. Second, provide resources and budget for IP protection and management in universities and private companies. And third, establish IP policies in all government agencies and government-owned and controlled corporations, universities, and private firms. As aptly put by Shahid Ali Khan, a modern and well-enforced intellectual property system is one of the strong imperatives for ensuring that the process of liberalizing the economic, industrial, and trade policies results in restricting the industrial and business sector and in encouraging small and medium enterprises to use IP as a means for national, social, and technological development. More than 20 years later, he mentioned that in his book in year 2000. So now we are already in 2022. The role of IP in spurring growth, innovation has, in today's digital age, has become more prominent. So with that, thank you for listening, and I hope that we will continue protecting our intellectual property in the new normal, despite all the challenges in the digital age. Thank you very much.